When I was about 8 years old, my family embarked on an unforgettable trip to Egypt. The country was vibrant, filled with ancient wonders, bustling markets, and golden beaches along the Red Sea. We spent 3 weeks exploring, from the pyramids of Giza to the lively streets of Cairo, soaking in the culture and history. 1 week of our adventure was dedicated to a thrilling desert safari. We rented a rugged SUV and set off into the vast Sahara, eager to discover hidden oases and remote villages. The first day was magical, driving through endless dunes, stopping every so often to stretch our legs, and marveling at the stark beauty of the desert. My sister and I built tiny sandcastles and chased each other around, laughing under the blazing sunday. That night, we stayed at a small desert lodge, excited for what the next day would bring. The following morning, we continued our journey, the SUV bouncing along sandy trails. Around midday, my parents decided to stop for a picnic in the middle of nowhere. We spread out a blanket, ate sandwiches, and played in the dunes. But when it was time to leave, the SUV wouldn't budge. Its tires had sunk deep into the soft sand. My parents tried digging and pushing, but nothing worked. Hours passed, and I started to panic, imagining we'd be stranded forever. My sister, younger and braver, just kept playing, while my parents stayed calm, reassuring us we had plenty of water and food. After nearly 4 hours, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. A pickup truck approached, driven by 2 local men who spoke broken English. They were friendly, offering to help free our vehicle. With ropes and their truck, they pulled our SUV out of the sand. We were very grateful to them. We even accepted their offer to follow them to a nearby guest house owned by a friend of theirs, where we could rest and ensure the car was in good shape. The guest house was charming, with mud brick walls and colourful rugs. My sister and I ran outside to a nearby dune, sliding down the slopes while my parents chatted with the men inside. As the sun set, the air grew chilly, and I went inside to grab a jacket. I noticed my dad standing quietly near a doorway, listening to the men as they spoke in Arabic. I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my jacket and rejoined my sister outside. That night, we settled all into our rooms. Around 3 a.m, my mum gently shook me awake, whispering that we were going for a quick drive. Confused but sleepy, I followed her. We gathered my dad and sister, slipped into the SUV, and drove off into the night, leaving the guest house behind. I didn't understand why we left so abruptly, and for the rest of the trip, we stayed in busy towns, avoiding the desert. Years later, my parents revealed the truth. My dad had overheard the men discussing a plan to hand us over to someone in the morning. Even worse, my mom had woken up in the night to see a shadowy figure slip into our room, holding something that looked like a knife. They suspected the men were part of a trafficking ring targeting stranded tourists. We never returned to that part of the desert, but the memory of that narrow escape still sends chills down my spine. In the late 90s, when I was 16, my older brother Jake and I lived in a small town on the edge of the Nevada desert. The vast, empty landscape was our playground, and we loved exploring it on our ATVs. One scorching August weekend, with the sun beating down mercilessly, we decided to venture out to a remote area near an old mining town called Goodsprings. The place was a ghost town with barely a soul around, especially in the summer heat. We loaded our ATVs onto a trailer and drove out to a desolate stretch of desert marked only by a few weathered Joshua trees and rocky outcrops. After unloading, we set off, weaving through dunes and dry washes, leaving small orange flags tied to bushes to mark our path back. The thrill of the ride kept us going for hours, stopping only for water and to refuel. As the sun hung low, we crested a ridge and spotted something unusual, a crumbling stone structure, half buried in sand, looking more like a bunker than the typical shacks you'd find out here. It was odd, too solid for a miner's shack, too isolated for anything else. Curiosity got the better of us, so we parked the ATVs and approached. The heavy wooden door was ajar, its hinges rusted and creaking as Jake pushed it open. Inside, it was a single, dim room, maybe 20 by 20 feet, smelling of dust and something faintly metallic. Scattered on the floor were empty energy drink cans, cigarette butts, and a few fast food wrappers, recent stuff, like someone had been here not long ago. A rusted metal cot sat in one corner, its springs sagging, and the walls were covered in graffiti. Names, dates, crude drawings, and random phrases scratched into the stone. Jake, always the bolder one, started poking around while I stood near the door, feeling uneasy. I noticed a loose floorboard under the cot and pointed it out. Jake knelt down, pried it up, and revealed a trapdoor, maybe 3 feet wide, leading to darkness below. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it down. A narrow shaft dropped about 10 feet into what looked like a tunnel carved into the rock. "Want to check it out?" he asked, grinning like it was a dare. I wasn't thrilled, but I wasn't about to let him call me a coward. So, I lowered myself down, my sneakers scraping against the rough walls as I descended. The tunnel was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and stretched back about 20 feet before opening into a low, cavernous room. The air was stale, and my flashlight beam caught glints of something embedded in the walls. I stepped closer and froze. The walls were covered in deep, frantic scratches, hundreds of them, crisscrossing like someone had clawed at the stone in desperation. Worse, I saw what looked like broken bits of fingernails caught in the grooves, some with dried, dark stains like blood. I also saw some tools, like knives and axes scattered around in the room. My stomach churned, and my breath caught in my throat. I backed up, nearly tripping over a thick iron ring bolted into the floor, a heavy chain attached to it, rusted but solid. The chain's end was frayed, like it had been yanked hard. Panic hit me like a wave, and I scrambled back through the tunnel, shouting for Jake as I climbed out. I told him everything, my voice shaking. His grin vanished, and for once, he didn't tease me. We grabbed our gear, jumped on the ATVs, and tore back toward the trailer, following our orange flags like our lives depended on it. Every shadow felt like it was watching us. We loaded up and sped home, barely speaking. Jake parked the truck in the backyard, covering it with a tarp, just in case. We told our mom, who insisted we call the sheriff. They took our report, but we never heard anything back, no news, no follow-up. We never returned to that spot, and even now, I can't shake the image of those claw marks or the dread of what that chain was used for. Some details of this story are a bit blurry, since it happened around 2018, and I've never shared it publicly before. I've read similar stories online and watched them on channels like yours too, which pushed me to write this down. Sorry if it's a bit long, I'll keep it as clear as I can. I met Sarah in high school in our small Midwest town. We clicked instantly over our love for music, gaming, and sci-fi novels. Her bold, unfiltered energy pulled me in. When her dad's job moved her family to Tucson, Arizona, we stayed close, texting or calling almost daily about school, crushes, and life. We shared everything, even our deepest secrets. We kept each other in the loop about our dating lives, cheering each other on or venting after breakups. We even tossed around the idea of dating each other, but the 1,000 plus miles between us made it impossible. Then, Sarah brought up Ethan. She met him at her new school in Tucson. He was quiet, bookish, and super smart, she said. When she told me they were dating, I was surprised she'd never mentioned him before. She was vague about it, saying he'd liked her for a while, and finally asked her out in his own shy way. I was happy for her and didn't think much of it. Over time, Ethan joined our dynamic. Sarah added him to our group chats, where he'd comment sparingly but politely. We'd video call sometimes, and he'd hop on, mostly listening but tossing in clever remarks. We shared a Notion page for brainstorming story ideas, and Sarah invited him to join. He seemed okay, if a bit reserved, and I warmed up to him. In summer 2018, I saved up to visit Sarah in Tucson. The trip was unforgettable hiking in Saguaro National Park, hitting up local taco joints and chilling like old times. Sarah and Ethan were on a break then, but I met him briefly at a diner. He was tall, pale, with messy blonde hair and glasses, about a year older than us. We were around 16. We talked about games and movies. He seemed normal. After I got home, Sarah's messages tapered off. I figured school and college prep were keeping her busy. Our calls dropped, and she was barely active in our chats. I was swamped with my own job and applications, so I didn't push, assuming she'd reach out when ready. One night in early 2019, Sarah called me, sobbing and frantic, around 2 a.m. It took ages to calm her enough to talk. When she did, the full story spilled out. Sarah hadn't really chosen to date Ethan. He'd just declared it. One day at school, he approached her, said they were together, and acted like it was settled. She went along, thinking it was his awkward way of asking her out. She also noticed he knew odd details about her, like her favourite bands and her schedule, which she chalked up to him crushing on her from a distance. But Ethan got controlling. He insisted on tagging along whenever she hung out with friends, even uninvited. He'd interrupt her conversations at school and demanded they meet between classes, even if it made her late. He grew fixated on me, accusing her of cheating because we were so close. That's why he joined our chats and Notion page to keep tabs on her, not to contribute. He'd quiz her about our calls, so she started hiding them. Their break during my visit wasn't mutual. Sarah told him I was coming, and he demanded she cancels. She refused, and he backed off temporarily. Meeting him at the diner was unplanned, and Sarah later said she was scared he'd make a scene. After I left, Ethan cycled between apologies and control. He'd be sweet, then manipulative, trying to isolate her. He spread lies, claiming I'd trashed her or him, hoping to cut us off. Sarah didn't believe him, but he wore her down. He'd check her phone and laptop, deleting messages he didn't like. Things came to a head after a fight where Sarah threatened to tell me everything and leave him. He grabbed her arm, leaving bruises, and shouted that she couldn't leave. Shaken, she agreed to stay quiet, but secretly planned to contact me. Sensing her distance, he offered a weekend trip to make it right by driving her out to the Sonoran Desert for stargazing. She agreed, hoping to avoid another blow-up. That Friday night, police showed up at her house. They sat Sarah and her parents down and explained they'd gotten an anonymous tip from one of Ethan's classmates. The classmate overheard him planning to take Sarah deep into the desert, where he intended to kill her and himself with a gun so they'd be together forever. If she resisted, he'd use a knife as backup. A search of his car turned up a loaded handgun, a knife, and a notebook outlining his plan to drive her to a remote spot near Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. Sarah called me right after the police left, spilling everything and apologizing for hiding it. She thought she could handle it alone and didn't want me involved. We talked all night, piecing it together. We stayed in touch after that, but we've since drifted. I check her Instagram. She's back in the Midwest with her aunt, looking happy. Ethan, I heard, was sent to a mental health facility. Sarah mentioned a restraining order, and he wasn't deemed fit for trial. It still shakes me that I met this guy, talked to him, and had no clue he was planning to murder my best friend. The terror in Sarah's voice that night still haunts me. I'm so thankful for that tip. Without it, I can't bear to think what might have happened.